So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us here tonight for a very special Friday edition. Tonight on the show, we're going to be talking about the Baltimore riots that happened over the last few weeks, the announcement of the prosecutor taking 6 police officers and charging them, something that we haven't seen in some times. We'll discuss 10 years later, Michael Jackson. We'll give you a sneak peek into that. Well, the June 13th show is coming up, but we'll give you a little sneak into that. We'll talk about Jim Clemente and his comments about Tom, and he'll respond to that. We'll also talk about Wade and Save Chuck and Jerry Sandusky. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. He represented Iron Mike Tyson, Iron Michael Jackson, and he acquitted Michael Jackson on all counts. He didn't even get to trial with Mike Tyson, but he's represented them all. He's back. It's been a while. Ladies and gentlemen, defense attorney out of L.A., Mr. Tom Mesereau. Good evening, Tom, and how are you?
Hi, Jordan. I'm doing fine. Thank you for inviting me back. Looking forward to it.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. I wanted to start out with some going back to the trial. So I'm going to play some of the trial courtesy of Luna Joe, and when you hear it, I want you to tell me what comes to mind when we play this clip here. Okay, I believe this is about Chris Tucker. So let's play clip 1.
Out of the Michael Jackson trial, as we've been reporting, the defense rested on Wednesday, and the case is expected to go to the jury next week. So the defense rested. It called 50 witnesses in 15 days, finishing up with comedian Chris Tucker, who basically claimed that he was nervous about this family, that he referred to the boy in his wheedling, cunning ways. A big success for the defense?
He gave the defense exactly what they needed. There have been some witnesses who come forward who we thought were going to provide the defense with more. Chris Tucker gave them exactly what they needed, which is that he knew this boy, the accuser. He knew the mother. And you know what? He didn't trust them from day one. And he's not just talking about the mother, because there have been a lot of witnesses who come forward and said, this mother, all she wanted was money, she was trouble. This is a witness who's coming forward and saying, even the boy himself was cunning. Even the boy himself was always asking for money. And that's the theory of the defense here.
Overall, assess the case put forth by Tom Mesereau and his team.
I think it was a good case. The defense presented, I think, a pretty strong case. In many of these cases, we don't see any defense at all. We see a couple of witnesses come forward. Here you had witnesses who said, this accuser, this mother, cannot be trusted. And remember, that's the heart of the case. The heart of this case is, do you believe the boy is making these accusations? Do you believe his brother, who says that he saw molestation? And do you believe this mother, that they were all confined at the Neverland home? I think for the prosecutors, the key is looking at the big picture, saying, there's a pattern here. This is not just about this boy. It's not just about this family. This is the M.O. for Michael Jackson, and this is just one in a series of events.
And in fact, another boy came forward, right, which could be the most damaging witness of all.
And I think that there have been a number of other cases, and the prosecution wants to put that into perspective. The defense, on the other hand, wants this jury to just look at this family. Look at the mother. She can't be trusted.
Finally, acquittal or conviction? What do you think?
There's no question that it's more likely there'll be an acquittal than a conviction. Could be a hung jury, could be some sort of compromise. But if you're the prosecutor, I think you've got to be nervous.
Wow, Tom, Dan Abrams really had a lot to say about the mother, about his thoughts. He thought maybe a hung jury. Hearing that now 10 years later, what's your thought?
Well, it just reminds me of just what an up and down, event this was. When the prosecution rested, I had to think long and hard about whether we needed to put on a case, because I felt that I had more good days cross-examining their witnesses and battering their case than I really had at any other trial I've done. But I thought to myself, if this is a hung jury, Michael Jackson's going to get retried. And if there's a retrial, I think this judge is going to change some of his rulings. He may not allow the outtakes from the Bashir documentary to come in.
Right.
And I thought of the, second Menendez brothers trial. Do you remember the Menendez brothers in the 90s in Los Angeles?
Vaguely, but I saw the story on court TV. I didn't actually watch it, but I saw the whole story.
Two, well-educated, handsome young men with wealthy parents. And
didn't they claim molestation on the part of the father? Wasn't that one?
They did. They went to San Diego and bought shotguns and ammunition, drove back to Los Angeles, and executed their parents in a very cold-blooded way, and then tried to claim that they had come home and found them shot to death. And they actually got away with it for a while until one of them confessed to his psychiatrist, who then alerted, I think the psychiatrist's girlfriend, I believe, alerted the authorities. And to make a long story short, the first jury was a hung jury. It wasn't hung because any juror wanted to acquit them. It was hung because the jurors could not agree what to convict them of. Some said first-degree murder, some said second-degree murder, some said manslaughter. And so there was a retrial after that first hung jury. And the judge in that case, in my opinion, wanted to see them convicted, thought they were guilty. And he changed a lot of his rulings and hurt the defense. He wouldn't allow the defense to bring in certain experts, to bring in certain witnesses, to bring in certain evidence. And they were convicted in the second trial. I had a suspicion that this judge, who I like, by the way, as a person, and I think he tried to be fair in that trial. I had a feeling that if we had a retrial, he would have changed some of the rulings that helped us, like seeing the outtakes from the Bashir documentary. And I felt that Michael Jackson couldn't withstand a second trial. I saw him deteriorate physically and emotionally. You remember that verdict day, he looked just terrible. And so I said to myself,
for a couple of days, the verdict day especially.
When the prosecution rested their case, I thought about, my opinion was that 99.9% of criminal defense attorneys in America probably would have not put on a defense case. Because they would have said, I think they would have said to themselves, if we put on our own witnesses, they're going to be subject to cross-examination. Things can change on a dime in a criminal trial. And, we're going to get a hung jury, and it's going to be a victory because nobody gave us a chance coming into this. I knew that most of my colleagues, if not all of them, would not have put on a defense case. But I said to myself, we have to go for acquittal. We have to take risks. We have to take chances.
Sorry to interrupt you, but witnesses like Wade Robson, Macaulay Culkin, Wade, who recently changed flip-flop, Macaulay Culkin and Chris Tucker gave you, as Dan Abrams pointed out, just what you needed to debunk this idea that it was only the mother. So in retro, isn't it better that you did call Chris Tucker, Wade, and Macaulay Culkin especially?
Well, obviously, the way things turned out, my decision was a correct one. But you may not remember in the middle of that trial when Wade Robson testified and Brett Barnes testified and Macaulay Culkin testified, and they all agreed that they had slept in his bed while traveling with him, and also at Neverland. And a lot of the pundits on television were saying, Mesereau made a huge mistake because now it's gotten into the record that these young men were sleeping with him. So there's always a flip side to putting on a defense case because your witnesses are subject to cross-examination, and surprises happen in trials. But my decision was that we could not just have a hung jury because Michael would not withstand a retrial, and I think the judge would change some of his rulings, like I've seen happen elsewhere. And so I said, we're going to take the risk of putting on our witnesses, subjecting them to cross-examination. That will give the prosecution the right to have a rebuttal case. Remember, if I had rested and not put on a defense case, the prosecution would have not had any right to a rebuttal case. And you may remember that in their rebuttal case, the judge, I was absolutely outraged when he let them play Gavin Arvizo's police interview, because it's what we in the law call hearsay, and it's generally not admissible. And I thought the judge was just throwing them a life raft, quite honestly. So when I heard those comments of Dan Abrams, it just brought me back to all the decisions that had to be made in that pressure cooker of a trial up in Santa Maria. And fortunately, it worked out. Now, as far as Chris Tucker goes, a couple of years ago, Sidney Poitier, the famous actor, published a novel, a science fiction novel, and Oprah Winfrey had a little reception for him at the Bel Air Hotel in Los Angeles. And I was invited to go, so I went there, and there was Chris Tucker.
Was this? When was this with the Oprah Winfrey?
A couple of years ago, I was invited to this event, and I went to it, and I entered the hotel room, and it was a lovely affair. And I'm a great admirer of Sidney Poitier. I think he's a wonderful, wonderful man. And Chris Tucker was there, and we hugged each other. And I told him, I said, you and Macaulay Culkin are two stand-up people. I will never forget the character you both showed, the way you stood by Michael Jackson, because so many of his people he thought were his friends did not have the courage or the guts to appear on his behalf in that trial because they thought he was going to go down, and they thought it was going to hurt their career or whatever else they thought. But Chris Tucker and Macaulay Culkin were not going to be dissuaded by anybody. I mean, there were lawyers, managers, agents, producers, people telling both of them, this is going to hurt your career, don't go up to Santa Maria and testify for Michael Jackson. And they both said, we don't care what anybody says. If Michael needs us, we're going up there and telling the truth. And Chris Tucker was my last witness. And he did really go to bat for Michael Jackson. He testified that his family had taken advantage of him, that he warned Michael, to be careful. As was said in that quote earlier, he did describe Gavin Arvizo as cunning, and he was a real great witness for Michael Jackson. I began with Wade Robson, and I ended with Chris Tucker when I put on a defense case. And of course, I'm still in shock over Wade Robson's lawsuit against the Jackson estate. I just can't believe it, but because he was so strongly in favor of Michael Jackson when he testified, and I also called his mother and his sister, all of whom testified in support of Michael Jackson. So many years later, after he's passed away, to sue the estate and do an about face is just shocking to me.
Oh, it's totally shocking to me. We do have coverage. This is April 29th. Debbie Rowe just got finished testifying. Here's the coverage of that, and I want to get your thoughts on the other side.
Just a little over 300 miles west of here, more witnesses are set to take the stand in the Michael Jackson trial today. And this morning, prosecutors are reeling after a second day of testimony from Jackson's ex-wife, Debbie Rowe. She was called to help their case, but as NBC's Mike Taibbi reports, that strategy may have backfired.
Debbie Rowe made it plain. She just wasn't going to say what prosecutors believed and told the court she'd say. In fact, she expanded her testimony that her glowing interview about her ex-husband 2 years ago was not rehearsed or scripted in any way, and talked not about a conspiracy led by Jackson against his accuser's family, but by the inner circle around Jackson aimed directly at the singer's money. They're opportunistic vultures, all of them, she said, adding that the current accuser's family was also after Jackson's millions. The prosecutors quickly ended their morning's examination of her after only 11 minutes.
You could essentially distill her testimony and use it as a closing argument if you're Michael Jackson's defense attorney.
Jackson's lead attorney, Tom Mesereau, also questioned Rowe very briefly, treating her as though she were his own witness. Who was Michael? He asked her gently. Well, there's my Michael, she answered, tearing up and looking at Jackson, and the Michael that everyone else sees. Questioned about her travels with the pop star, she turned to him and asked him directly which concert tours they'd been on. Prosecutors objected to the communication between witness and defendant.
If this is the prosecution's bombshell witness, it seems to have exploded in their face.
Court ended early. Mesereau clearly buoyed. One observer said you half expected Jackson to moonwalk out to his car. And while he didn't, it was as good a day as he's had in this trial, with the completion of the prosecution case just about at hand. For today, Mike Taibbi, NBC News, Santa Maria, California.
Okay, Tom, do you hear me? Let me let you in there. Tom, do you hear me now?
Yes, I do.
I'm sorry, I got disconnected there. Totally sorry about that. I hope that doesn't happen again. Anyway, your thoughts on what you heard about Miss Debbie Rowe?
Well, the reporting was very accurate. I mean, Debbie Rowe was projected to be a powerful witness for the prosecution. And, you know, when I lecture lawyers and law students on how to try a case, I often tell them that, you know, many lawyers get lost in their own egos and lost in their own work, and they forget who's important. And I said, just because you prepare to examine a witness a certain way doesn't mean you do it, because unexpected things happen in the courtroom. In the case of Debbie Rowe, I was prepared for a very antagonistic, hostile witness, because that's what the prosecution and the media were claiming she was going to be. And I had 20 binders of documents. I had every document I could find on Debbie Rowe, organized in chronological order, volume after volume. I'd been through every paper I could find in their divorce case. I'd been through every newspaper article, every police report, every statement that she allegedly ever made. And I was loaded for bear. And she got on the witness stand. She looked over at Michael, and I saw this look on her face of just, all of a sudden, it was just, you know, utter concern and, in my opinion, just great care and love for Michael Jackson. It just descended all over her all of a sudden. And she decided she was going to tell the truth and not just sing the prosecution's tune. And when I got up to cross-examine her, I didn't use one single document in those 20 binders. I was very gentle with her. It was obvious this was a very emotional and difficult experience for her. She seemed very, very sensitive and on edge. I treated her very gently and in a very friendly way. And she did a great job for Michael Jackson in that trial. There's no question about that. And the prosecutors just seemed stunned. They took her, the prosecutors and the police took her to one of the nicest restaurants in Santa Maria the night before she testified, and they thought she was going to be a star witness for them. And it just backfired. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I couldn't tell if you heard me or not. Okay.
Yes. So the prosecutors, they wined and dined her and didn't seem to work, right?
No, I think they, I don't know whether they intimidated her or what they did, but they just seemed to think that she was going to be, you know, the best witness they ever put on the stand in a courtroom, and she turned out to be a disaster for them. And she testified that Michael was a wonderful father, that the people around him repeatedly took advantage of him, that he didn't know what these people were doing, and she testified in a totally consistent way with what we were saying. She demolished their conspiracy theory that Michael somehow was leading a conspiracy of criminals to falsely imprison a family and abduct children and commit extortion. She was a great witness for Michael Jackson in that trial, and I've never forgotten it.
No question. For this next segment of the Jerry Sandusky, I want to introduce a special guest. I think you told me you heard of him before. He's from FramingPaterno.com. He's been following the Sandusky case and the Joe Paterno case, and I know recently you, Tom, have wrote an article or something about Jerry Sandusky. So let's say hello to Mr. John Ziegler. Good evening, John. How are you?
I'm doing well, and Tom, always good to speak to you, and I enjoyed the discussion on the Jackson case. I certainly wish that you had been representing Jerry Sandusky, because I think he'd be playing golf today if you had been.
Well, John, it's good to talk to you, and just so everyone knows, John contacted me and wanted to talk to me about the Sandusky trial, which I didn't really know a lot about. I followed it at a distance. The press coverage, of course, was terrible for the defense. It seemed to me they had rushed this case to trial, but I don't really know what happened between Mr. Sandusky and these young men, and I was never in the courtroom. But I talked to John, and I did a little research myself, and I came to the conclusion that, as John believes, that there were some major problems with the way this case was conducted. I don't know if he's innocent or guilty. I really don't know. But when John pointed out to me just the financial motives that some of these, or perhaps all of these alleged victims may have had, I kept drawing parallels to the Michael Jackson case. For example, John pointed out to me that these alleged victims, for the most part, went to one attorney to represent them in their financial claims against Penn State. Well, it just reminded me of the Arvizos going to attorney Larry Feldman, who had represented Jordy Chandler in the early 90s. And they spoke with him before they went to the police, as I recall. And then John pointed out to me the lack of third-party witnesses allegedly watching what happened, because apparently most of the trial, if not all of it, was young men who had financial motives claiming they were molested with nobody corroborating any of this. And I looked at some other factors, and again, I kept getting flashbacks to the Michael Jackson case, the way the media tried to cook Michael, the financial motives that were everywhere, the way witnesses came out of the woodwork who, in my opinion, wanted fame or fortune or both. And I just saw too many, upsetting parallels, and talked to John quite a bit and decided to do the article. But again, I'm not an authority on the Sandusky case. I wasn't in the courtroom, and I don't really know what happened with Mr. Sandusky and these young men. However, there are enough problems in that case to certainly get people thinking, was this really a fair trial? It seems to me it may not have been.
And, Tom, I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at it yet, but this week the Sandusky defense team released, or was unsealed, their post-conviction relief petition, which I think does an extraordinary job of exposing exactly what you just said, which is that the trial was not fair. It was a violation of his constitutional rights. It was a modern version of the Salem witch trial. You did a great job in your op-ed, which people can see at framingpaterno.com. But what you probably aren't even aware of, because it was just in the petition this week, is this is a classic example of just incredible prosecutorial misconduct and defense incompetence. One of the major counts that Sandusky was convicted on was the so-called janitor episode. The janitor never testified at trial because we were told he had dementia. Well, we learned this week that before the prosecution determined that he had dementia, they interviewed him on video, and the transcript of that interview has now been released, and 3 times the janitor says, when asked, was that Jerry Sandusky that you saw, he says, no, 3 times. And it is my view that the prosecution simply decided at that point, thank you very much, Mr. James Calhoun, that's his name. You have dementia, clearly, because you gave us the wrong answer. We will not be needing you to testify at trial, and we're going to rely on hearsay evidence, which should never even come in, hearsay testimony, under a bizarre exception to the hearsay rule. And Jerry ended up getting convicted on 5 counts in that episode without a victim, without a witness, without a contemporaneous report, and without a date. And that is emblematic of the entire case. And I went into this believing that Joe Paterno, as you believe, Tom, was railroaded by the news media. I never dreamed that Jerry Sandusky was, but now I am completely convinced that he was. And this is, I know you don't have the experience enough to be able to say it, and I admire you for what you've done here, Tom, and I totally respect your position. But having lived it for 3 years, I'm positive that Jerry is innocent. It's the only scenario that makes any sense and is consistent with all the known evidence in the case.
Well, it's funny because Jordan told me before this interview that he was going to ask me about Jim Clemente. And
right.
Jordan actually emailed me a few clips of Mr. Clemente's comments about me, and one of them was, he said I was wrong when I said that there were no third-party witnesses, and he references the janitor.
Matter of fact, I have that clip. Let me play that clip for you guys, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss what Mr. Clemente said.
All right, the last thing I want to talk about rather quickly, because we're sort of running out of time, is the issue. Actually, we had Tom Mesereau on the show while Jim was off filming episodes of Criminal Minds. And Tom Mesereau was talking about Mr. Sandusky and raising some issues about that case. And I was kind of sorry that Jim wasn't here to chat with him. But basically, the issue was that that there were some problems in the prosecution of Mr. Sandusky because the one eyewitness to the sexual abuse, McCreary, the assistant coach, was found not to be credible by even the jury and had changed the story a multitude of times. And my question to Mr. Mesereau was, is it necessary to have an independent witness if there are people claiming that they were sexually abused? I mean, I know it's not as easy to prosecute when there is one person saying, I didn't do it, and somebody else saying that you did. But what has been your experience in that case? Do you think that there were some issues that with the prosecution that make you less convinced of Sandusky's guilt?
Absolutely not. Mr. Mesereau, Mr. Mesereau is wrong when he says that McCreary was not believed by the jury. They only didn't convict of the anal rape of that child. They did convict based solely on McCreary's testimony for sexual molestation of the child and of a minor, corruption of a minor. So there were two charges that were based solely on McCreary's testimony. They did find him credible. So, sorry, Tom, that's not accurate. But the fact is...
He did change his story a number of times.
He did, yeah. There's no question. And the way he changed his story, there are issues with McCreary. And, we can talk about them another time if you want. But the fact is that he was one eyewitness. Actually, there were two other eyewitnesses. One was a janitor who passed away, but he had told the story to a second janitor, and that person testified. And then there was the coach at the grade school, where one of the victims was laying on the floor with Sandusky late at night in a back room of the gym, and the coach saw him, and Sandusky got up on one elbow and said, we're just working on some wrestling moves. And the coach thought, well, I'm the wrestling coach, and I don't know any wrestling moves like that. But he said, what am I talking about? This is Jerry Sandusky. He's a saint. That child later came forward, and that eyewitness testimony corroborated what that child said. So that he was then molested later that evening. So there are more than one eyewitness, and the jury did find that witness credible. So that's not really safe to say. So I don't, for those reasons...
They were he was raising issues and questions
I get it.
About it. And he was not saying that he thought, just to be clear with you guys, he wasn't saying that he thought he was innocent. He said there were some problems for him.
And I get it. And actually I watched the show, and it was very good, and he was actually balanced, and he did say that he hasn't analyzed this particular case, he's not an expert on it, and so forth. But I will say that, that there are...
But you are. That's why I wanted...
I did analyze the case, and I would love to talk to Tom about it and explain...
He will be back.
I bet, and so will I. So I would love to explain the details of it and debate with him or whatever. But he also said this. He said, the Michael Jackson trial was littered with testimony of people who had financial incentive to exaggerate, embellish, or worse. It was an embarrassment. Well, I do think, I agree with Tom Mesereau on one point, that Michael Jackson and Jerry Sandusky are very much the same kind of person. I believe that they are both nice guy, pillar of the community, acquaintance offenders, who everybody who knew them loved them. That's what they were. And they used that position to do things. I believe Mr. Sandusky was actually much more of an offender than Michael Jackson was. I think the fact that Michael Jackson, what Sandusky is accused of doing and convicted of doing was much more heinous than what Michael Jackson was accused of doing, but not convicted of doing. But I think that when you look at, he's denigrating the witnesses or or the victims that then sued civilly when Michael Jackson's family sued AEG for billions of dollars, not millions, billions of dollars because of what happened to Michael. And it is a legitimate process, and it is not something that undermines the credibility of the people.
Well, I don't know. I do think that most prosecutors would probably argue that you don't want your witnesses who are going to be in a criminal prosecution to be engaging in civil lawsuits because it looks as if they have another...
But it happened the same thing.
It looks as if they might have another... But people are concerned about it. It's the same thing as taking money to appear on some television show to talk about what happened. They want it to be a pure process where they go after them. Because otherwise,
it was an absolutely separate process. They weren't they didn't sue till after the criminal process was over.
But there was in both of those cases a deep pocket, and it does make people wonder when somebody is trying to, is going after someone civilly.
I'm not saying that it shouldn't make people wonder, but it does not undermine the credibility of it. It does not make it. I mean, was the Jackson family exaggerating, embellishing, and embarrassing because they went and sued AEG, or did they want to get retribution for the fact that this company pushed Michael to the point where he's dead now?
Well, furthermore, there was no criminal charges filed against AEG.
Well, the doctor, he was convicted.
I know,
and
that was a civil lawsuit.
Right.
Yes, I know, but
it was based on the criminal conviction of the doctor. So the doctor was convicted, then they filed a civil suit.
Okay, first I want to go to Tom Mesereau on this, and then John Ziegler in response to what Mr. Jim Clemente said. So, Tom,
first,
you take the floor first.
I think you got to see a psychiatrist. I think he needs help. I mean, first of all, he says that he agrees with me that Michael and Sandusky were alike. I never said they were alike. In fact, I can't think of two people more different than Michael Jackson, a creative genius, and Sandusky, a career football coach. I mean, I don't know what Clemente was smoking before that interview, but it's not legal. Let's put it that way. No, I think, and then to compare alleged victims of molestation who go to lawyers to get money before they go to the police with the AEG case. I mean, this guy is from outer space. I don't know. I don't know. He's got some problems that really need to be addressed. I actually thought he was a lot more intelligent than I do now after hearing this thing. As far as the witnesses in the case, I'll defer to John Ziegler on that one. He's more of an authority than I am.
Well, Tom, let me back up what you just said about Jim Clemente. I had a very similar experience with Jim. I went into I've had hours and hours of conversation with Jim Clemente, and I presumed at the first, naively, that he was an expert. I mean, because he's got good credentials and the media treats him as if he's an expert. And I slowly realized he didn't have a clue about both the facts of the case as well as just basic reality of human behavior. He does not understand human behavior. He's been wrong about almost every case I've ever seen him comment on, including the Jackson case. And as far as the facts of alleged facts of what he references there, it's hilarious. First of all, we'll go in reverse order. He counts someone witnessing wrestling as somehow a third-party witness to sexual abuse, which is preposterous and I think on its face absurd. The janitors I've already proven were a joke, and the direct witness there never testified and said on the record in an interview that the prosecution did, which was just made public this week, that Jerry Sandusky was not the person he saw. So that's number two now. And the third one is Mike McQuarrie. And see, Jim's in a real tough spot here, Tom, because Jim's been paid a lot of money by the Paterno family to have a very, very nuanced view of Mike McQuarrie. See, Mike McQuarrie has to be telling part of the truth, but he can't be telling the whole truth, but he also can't be totally lying because Scott Paterno has paid him a lot of money to have a particular view. I believe that Jim Clemente will say whatever it is that for whatever is in his self-interest, whether that's money or whether that's fame or whether it's both. But Mike McQueary, you are right, was not believed by the jury because on the primary, most important, most salacious charge, Jerry Sandusky, despite a hanging jury and all the media coverage in the world supporting a false narrative, was found not guilty on that particular charge involving Mike McQueary. And I frankly believe the jury should have found him not guilty on all of them because we have the Whitney, the actual victim, quote-unquote victim, the kid who was in the shower as a 24-year-old sergeant in the Marine Corps, married. He gave a statement to Joe Amendola, Jerry Sandusky's attorney, making it very, very clear that he was the boy in the shower that night. Nothing ever happened. Jerry was the greatest thing that ever happened to him. And it was the second time he had said that because he had been interviewed by police just 2 months prior. And 4 months prior, he had written a series of articles in the newspaper, letters to the editor, defending Jerry Sandusky. This was a kid who got absorbed by the primary lawyer in the case after Joe Paterno gets fired, after Fort Knox gets opened by Penn State. Everybody knows there's money, and that lawyer flipped this particular victim, a kid by the name of Alan Myers, who was the boy in the McQueary episode. He was not molested, and Mike McQueary is mistaken and was manipulated by prosecutors to provide the smoking gun of a crime that never happened. And Jim Clemente is clueless. I've experienced him firsthand. He has lied to me under very stressful situations. He has manipulated me, and I believe him to be a whore. And so Tom thinks he's smoking something that's illegal, and I believe him to be a bad person who's not very bright and is not nearly the expert he's portrayed to be.
Well, when I said smoke something illegal, I was joking. I mean,
understood, Tom.
I'm just using that comment to illustrate how absurd this guy is. I mean, to say I said they were alike, boy, would never said anything like that. And if you look at Michael Jackson, an absolute genius in choreography and music and dance and song, running around the world doing humanitarian things, and you look at Jerry Sandusky, who's a big, muscular football coach, and that's all I know he ever did. Who would ever say these two are alike, other than Jim Clemente? It's just, I mean, I have more respect for, even though I don't agree with him. He is a lawyer. He was an FBI agent. He has been an expert of sorts, as I understand it, in various trials, I think, around the country. He was an FBI expert, I believe, pedophilia, and he was the one that the prosecutors were consulting with during the investigation into Michael Jackson. I mean, after what I heard in that quote, I'm glad the prosecutors did consult with him. It may have helped them lose.
Well, Tom, I spoke to Jim about the Jackson case. He claims, and I don't know if this is true or not because I don't trust Jim. He claims to have been there when Michael Jackson was physically examined for identifying marks. And I think what's really interesting about Jim Clemente, Tom, and I'd like to hear your take, is that because he's an abuse victim, he claims to be an abuse victim himself, I think that this creates an extraordinary bias on his part when it comes to cases like this. I don't think he can possibly imagine, and I'm giving him credit for being sincere, I don't think he can possibly imagine the notion that anybody would ever tell a false story of sex abuse. Because he was an abuse victim himself. And I think this sets up an incredibly devastating precedent and rule, if you will, for investigators, because now we're in a world where if you say you were abused, you have to be believed, and if you deny you're abused, that's actually a sign you were abused based upon people like Jim Clemente. So how do you possibly defend yourself against an accusation like that? What is your take on that, Tom?
Well, I mean, I met Jim one time when I interviewed on a show, and I talked to him before the show, and I talked to him during the show, and he seemed very professional. He seemed to be a very intelligent, articulate, restrained guy who at least purported to me to accept other viewpoints and treat them in a respectful way. But the quote I just heard from Jordan gives me a very different impression of this fellow. I don't know, something's off base for sure. Now Now, someone who's a victim of child abuse, may have a very difficult time being objective when someone else raises a similar allegation. But, there have been many false allegations of child abuse through the years. And, I remember in the Michael Jackson trial cross-examining one of the experts for the prosecution on false claims made in child custody cases where parents who are just filled with anger and venom towards the other side will get their kids to say they were molested when it didn't happen. I mean, this is an area, it's a very troubling, very serious area of the law which is very, very ripe, in my opinion, with exaggerated claims and with false claims, and also with true claims. Don't get me wrong. I mean, child abuse is a horrific part of life. It's absolutely monstrous what some people do to helpless children, and but I've seen enough false claims made, and as a defense attorney, to know that you have to be very, very careful when you listen to a child to determine if they're really being truthful and objective, or if someone has put ideas in their mind for whatever purpose, like I just described in many of these child custody cases, divorce cases. Early in my career, I don't do divorce work, but earlier in my career, you didn't hear very often, divorcing parents claim the other parent was a child molester. Now it seems like it's a norm, and people just get very vindictive and very hostile, and they manipulate situations. So you've got to be very careful in deciding who has influenced a child when they make these allegations. The allegations they make may be perfectly true. They may be the victims of absolute monstrous behavior. They also may be put up to it by manipulative parents who have fed information into their imagination, and suddenly the child believes it's true because their parents have told them it is. It's a very, very difficult, sensitive, tricky area of the law, and you have to be alert to the possibility that people are going to manipulate it. I mean, look at the Wade Robson, Jimmy Safechuck case. I mean, these are two young men. I mean, as I've said many times, when I decided to put on a defense case, I knew it was fraught with risks, because anytime you put on a witness in a trial, it's fraught with risks, because they're subject to cross-examination. You don't know what the other side will come out with. In the Michael Jackson trial, Ron Zonin was one of the finest, prosecutors I've ever seen, passionate, determined, aggressive, very smart, very prepared. And I remember when he just went after Wade Robson viciously for supporting Michael Jackson. But the point I wanted to make was I wanted to start our case strong, and I wanted to end strong. And I did just that. I started with Wade Robson, who was absolutely adamant under oath that Michael Jackson had never done anything improper towards him. He even called it ridiculous. And this was a young man who was intelligent, who was articulate, who seemed very mature. I called his mother and his sister also as witnesses, because they supported Michael Jackson, and they had been traveling with them, and they had no problem with anything they saw Michael do. I ended with Chris Tucker, who was just a tremendous witness for the defense. And in between, we had witnesses. I mean, there was one woman I'll never forget. She left some messages, tearful messages on my machine, and I called her back, and she said she had been a paralegal at a law firm that had represented Janet Arvizo when Janet Arvizo and her children were suing JCPenney stores for assault. And she claimed that Janet Arvizo had told her that she made the story up of sexual abuse, and threatened her that if she ever told anybody, she could be very difficult to deal with. I think this woman even said something, claimed there was some threat about the Mexican mafia. But nevertheless, I had a lot of witnesses to support the idea that these kids were making these claims against Michael Jackson up, that they had been hustling other people for money, including Chris Tucker, including there was a woman we had testify who was the editor of a local newspaper, who claimed that Mrs. Arvizo went to her and told her they needed money for chemotherapy, and later on, the newspaper, I think, raised money for it. As I recall, it was something like $25,000, and then they found out that Teamsters Union Insurance money was paying for medical costs. So, I mean, the witnesses were endless to show that there was financial manipulation and a financial motive and a pattern of doing this with other people, including celebrities. So when you go through an experience like I did with Michael Jackson, and you realize just how people concocted ugly claims of child molestation and child abuse, it sticks with you. You have to look very carefully at claims of child abuse, and sometimes we'll never really know what the truth is, or whether the truth was embellished more than it really was, or whether a child is so self-conscious about it, so sensitive about what happened that they don't even explain how bad it was. I mean, it's a very, very sensitive, difficult part of life, and particularly difficult part of trial practice. But I'll tell you, after what I saw in the Michael Jackson trial, and that went on for about 5 months, when I saw some similarities to what had happened in the Sandusky case, and again, I wasn't there. I never saw a single witness. I'm not an expert on the case like John Ziegler, but I'm disturbed by this financial motive. And, life is difficult, and putting money in your pocket's not easy. And, when you see a pot of gold out there, and you've got parents, salivating over getting money in their pocket or their child's pocket, you've got to look carefully at those facts and decide what you think is true and what you think is not. But Jim Clemente in that quote is just, he's off the wall.
well,
and
Tom,
John,
I feel... Go ahead.
Yeah, before you just say your few comments, say your comments, and then I want to give you your plug for your website. And thank you for joining us.
I just wanted to thank Tom for his courage and standing up for what he believes in general, and also specifically in the Sandusky case. And people can see his op-ed at our website, framingpaterno.com. And just one last point on the comparison there, Tom. There are a lot of similarities in that you had a lot of mothers in the Sandusky case, situations where there is no father. You got a troubled kid, which, by the way, is part of why those kids end up interacting with a Sandusky or a Michael Jackson, because the charity element of this is an important part of this equation, and then it ends up leaving the celebrity being vulnerable because now you got a mother who's manipulating a kid, and in the Sandusky case, these were teenagers when the alleged abuse occurred, which I think is rather suspicious. But there's no question that once that someone is perceived as being, quote-unquote, a pedophile, that they are seen through a different prism, and it becomes much easier for investigators or potentially, in this case, in the case of Sandusky, mothers or even journalists, like happened in the Sandusky case. It's easy for them to manipulate people into believing either that they were molested or to take advantage of it, because they don't think that they're putting an innocent person behind bars. Once they think, oh, this person's guilty, and in the case of Michael and in the case of Jerry, they're both a little bit odd. They both are very touchy-feely. They're both affectionate with kids. So they think, well, gee, it never happened to me, but it may have happened to somebody else, and if I'm not going to be the one to put an innocent person to jail, then I might as well get my money out of this. And I think that's what really happened in the Penn State case. And I just want to thank Tom for having very rare courage and intelligence to see through the media myth here. And I appreciate the time to speak to you guys. Thanks, and you guys have a great night.
Thanks, John. And visit John's website. John, your website is?
framingpaterno.com.
Thanks a million for joining us for this segment. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you for the compliments, John.
Bye-bye, Tom.
Okay, Tom, there's a couple more clips via the Michael Jackson, but we do have some callers. When I say your area code, please state your name and where you're calling from. All right, let's go over to 912. Please state your name and where you're calling from. You're next with Tom Mesereau, and you're live. 912, it's your turn.
Hi, my name is Mel, and I just have a couple of questions for Mr. Mesereau regarding his
What's
opinion
your name?
on Mel.
Oh, hi, Mel. Good evening.
Hi.
Hi,
Mr.
Mel.
Mesereau.
Hi.
I just have a couple of questions regarding your opinion on how you would have handled the 93 situation. I do realize you were not involved, but we can all agree that the settlement was a very bad idea. But I was doing a little bit of reading, and what I read was stating that since the Chandlers filed the civil suit in the midst of the police investigation, I was reading that it kind of put Michael's defense in a bad place, because had the civil trial come before a criminal trial, which we knew never happened because they could never even indict him because the evidence was so feeble. But had the civil trial come before a criminal trial, would that not have put him in a bad place? I did read that they attempted to get the civil trial postponed, but that was barred by a judge by the name of David Rothman. And by the way, do you know if he's related to Barry Rothman, who was Evan Chandler's attorney?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a relation, because that's not a very common name. But
I never heard that. I have trouble believing that. I think I would have heard that if it were true.
Okay. I was reading that it was barred by they were attempting to get the civil trial postponed until after the criminal trial, and it was barred by a judge by the name of David Rothman, and then they attempted to also bar the state prosecution from being able to utilize any of the information from the civil trial, and that was declined as well. So that's not true?
Well, look, I mean, it was the worst settlement, that I can think of in legal history, because it set in motion, in my opinion, a series of events that ended up with Michael going through the case in 2005, which I think in many ways he never recovered from, emotionally and physically. He after that trial, I suggested to him very strongly that he had to leave Neverland, because I felt that the prosecution and the sheriffs were so humiliated and embarrassed by the acquittal. I felt they'd always be gunning for him. And I told Michael and the people around him, I said, my view of life is nothing is ever permanent. Everything has a time and place. And Neverland's time has come and run, because you can't you'll never live in peace here. They'll say some child wandered through the fence, and they'll try and pin something on you. They're always going to be watching. Because when I got in that case, I had never tried a case in Santa Barbara County, which is north of Los Angeles County, and, started to hang around alone, in the bars and restaurants to try and figure out, what the community was like, and to observe people, and, when appropriate, ask them questions. What do they think of Michael Jackson? What do they think of the case? And when I got in, I visited the evidence locker with Mr. Snedden and the prosecutors and some of the sheriffs. And my feeling was that these people were so convinced they couldn't lose this, and so convinced that they were going to be stars on the world stage, and so excited by all of this. When the opposite happened, I just felt they would never get over it. I don't think they ever did. But nevertheless, I think that, when Michael left Neverland, unfortunately, he lived in a lot of different places, the Middle East, Ireland. He thought of England. He went to Las Vegas. He came back to Los Angeles. I don't know if he ever really settled in and was comfortable anywhere. That's sort of my observation. And all of this, in my opinion, can be traced back to that horrific settlement in 1993. I know the lawyers, particularly Mr. Weitzman, who's signed the settlement agreement and appeared at the press conference to announce it. I know they have their explanations for it. What I find rather interesting is that I'm told that Mr. Branca and Mr. Weitzman are all blaming it on Johnny Cochran. Well, one of the Jackson family members told me recently that Johnny Cochran wanted to try the case and that Weitzman wanted to settle it. I wasn't
heard
there.
That. I heard that from Steve Manning as well, who was Michael's PR person, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said that Johnny Cochran wanted to try it as well.
Well, remember also that there was a second settlement that was also done as a confidential settlement, like the Chandler one. That was a Jason Franzia settlement. Now, I'd never heard of that until I got into the criminal case. And some people around Michael had been making statements that there was only one settlement, and I found out that there was a second one. And the second one, I don't know if Weitzman was directly involved in it, but it was the same law firm that Weitzman had been a partner in when the Chandler case was settled. I just don't know whether he signed that second agreement or not, or whether he was even at the firm at that point, because at one point he left the Cat and Muchin law firm and I believe went to work with an entertainment company. That's my recollection. So I don't know if he actually signed that one like he did the first one, but you know, the idea that we'll blame Johnny Cochran, who's now passed away and can't respond, right, I find just absurd. You know, they'll come up with explanations for it, that, you know, Michael couldn't withstand the trial or whatever, but none of it holds up because Michael withstood my trial, you know. He was beat up at the end of it. He looked terrible, but he was there 5 days a week. He was always cooperative with me, always very, very respectful of my views and the views of other members of the legal team, and he made it through, and he was acquitted. However, I think that 93 point, I think it probably enraged Snedden, who was determined, you know, for the rest of that decade and the beginning of the next decade to get Michael.
Right, that's why he had the law change.
And also, something that's not widely known, when I got in the case, I hired a jury consultant to do some surveys on the attitudes in the Santa Barbara community, particularly the Santa Maria community, which is northern Santa Barbara County. Before, I had never tried a case there, so I was trying to gather as much information from different sources as I could about what the people were like. And this jury consultant, you know, had her staff do a lot of phone surveys, and she put together a lot of information. And she put together information on what she thought an ideal prosecution juror would be, what she thought an ideal defense juror would be. And she, you know, factored in information like age and race and occupation and what part of town you lived in and political views and all of that. And to make a long story short, the thing that bothered both types of jurors the most was that $20 million settlement. Because whether jurors, you know, tended to be pro-prosecution or pro-defense, in theory, the thing that bothered them, every one of them, was this feeling that nobody would pay $20 million if they were innocent. Right. And that was an attitude that I had to cope with as I approached that trial. And you may recall I made a statement that Michael regretted ever accepting this advice. He regretted ever settling these matters. Because it wasn't just one settlement, it was a second one. And, you know, it really was something that was hard for us to deal with. Because just now, what happened in the trial was, to my shock, the judge allowed the prosecution to bring in the fact that he had settled these cases. The judge did not allow them to give the dollar amounts, but everybody knew what they were. They were all over the media. The alleged $20 million settlement was all over the place. So they can say we thought it would hurt the criminal investigation. They can say we didn't think Michael was ready for a civil trial. They can say whatever they want. But I'll say this. In the criminal case, we had to deal with all of these matters. We had to deal with the Chandler case. We had to deal with the Francia case. We had to deal with allegations that Brett Barnes and Macaulay Culkin and Wade Robson were molested, as well as the Arvizo clients. So we had to deal with all of these things at once, and we won. And, you know, if we could go to a conservative courthouse like the one in Santa Maria and defeat all of these clients, I think they could have defeated the Chandler claim in '93. But I think I wasn't there, so I was not privy to any of these discussions. But I just think the lawyers got scared, just like I think they're going to get scared in the current civil suits.
I really hope not.
I don't know if you've been following it, but it's almost 3 weeks ago, I believe, the judge said, I'll have a ruling in 2 days. And no ruling has come out. And I firmly believe that Franke and Weitzman are going to enter into a confidential settlement, keep everything quiet, make it look like it's
open up more floodgates. That's just going to open up more floodgates.
Well, I think they'll call it confidential, and I think they'll try and maybe pay him overseas or just, you know, make everything, do everything in a very disguised way. Remember, they're running a business, and I think they're afraid of what effect a trial will have on the business. That's my guess. I don't know. I haven't talked to them about it. I don't want to talk to them about it because I think,
Right.
They were there in '93, and they're there now, and I expect the same type of behavior.
It's so unfortunate. And I have one more question. It's just another opinion regarding that, the 93 situation. Michael had hired the attorney Burt Fields and the private investigator Anthony Pellicano. How would you have intercepted Evan Chandler? Like, it seems as though they kind of just, based on their words, they thought Evan Chandler was going to go away, which he didn't. Would it not have been easier to go to the police and maybe play offense on this thing instead of trying to wait around and end up trying to play defense? Like, how would you have handled knowing about that and knowing about the tapes where Evan Chandler is basically saying he's going to blackmail Michael Jackson? Like, how would you have handled that situation if you had all of these tapes?
As I recall, the civil lawyers sued Chandler for extortion, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the Chandlers or people around them hired even criminal defense counsel because they thought Michael Jackson's lawyers might be instigating some type of criminal case, as I recall. I wasn't there. I did learn everything I could about the case because, I walked into that trial in 2005 assuming that Jordy Chandler would testify. And, as it turns out, he refused to testify, and his mother testified. They had some other witnesses testify to acts that they claimed were consistent with, pedophilia. But one thing I've told people that is sort of ironic. You may recall Evan Chandler's brother wrote a book.
Ray Chandler.
I think it's an awful book. It came out right before the trial started, and I think it was time to prejudice the case against Michael. But what I did was I ended up reading that book 3 times. It was a horrible book, but it was a great lesson to me on what to expect the prosecution to throw at us when they started trying to show that Jordy Chandler was molested. So to me, it was a nice blueprint of what the enemy was thinking. And I found it to be very helpful in my preparation for that phase of the case. California has this very, very difficult law, which in a child molest case allows the prosecution to bring in, uncharged conduct, similar conduct to show that the defendant has a propensity to engage in this kind of behavior. And they thought that, if they brought in evidence that Robson, Culkin, Barnes, and Chandler, were molested, that the jury, even if they didn't believe the Arvizos, would assume something happened and at least convict them of one felony, and that would be all they needed to send them to prison for many years. But back to your initial question. Look, I wasn't involved in those discussions. I wasn't representing Michael in '93. I don't know what the lawyers were thinking. What I do know is it was the worst settlement in legal history, as far as I'm concerned. And I can understand why, if it's true, why Branca and Weitzman are trying to blame it on Cochran, because they don't want to get anywhere near, they don't want their names anywhere near that settlement. Now, Branca was not the litigator. He didn't sign the agreement. But if you read Randall Sullivan's book, he does report that someone close to the action claimed that Branca didn't think Michael could withstand a trial, which I understand also, quite honestly. A lot of people didn't think Michael Jackson could withstand the criminal case. And, he rose to the occasion. It broke him in many ways. And as I said before, I think that he lived like a Rolling Stone after it. I think he loved Neverland. He created Neverland to be a haven for him. And, it was such a magical, wonderful place, particularly at night. The tourists wouldn't go there at night. The people who were invited to enjoy Neverland during the day have no idea what Michael created at night. I mean, he had little sort of Disney-like music playing. He had little lights that he was such an artistic genius himself that he personally put little lights in different parts of Neverland, in different trees and bushes. And it was just like Fantasyland. It was like walking into a Walt Disney movie. And Michael loved Neverland. He loved the animals. He loved the beauty. He used to walk around late at night. He was a very nocturnal person. And he loved what he had created. And to have Neverland destroyed the way those sheriffs destroyed it and the way Tom Stenton destroyed it, and to break Michael's spirit the way that trial in many ways did, even though he survived it, stood up to it, it's just a real tragedy is all I can say.
Yeah, Neverland was his sanctuary, and it's a shame what they did to it, and they only did that because it was Michael Jackson. That's really, I mean, it was never about never about the truth. It was only about making a spectacle out of Michael.
Yeah. I think a lot of people thought they could profit off this case. And fortunately, justice was done in the courtroom. I don't know if Mike Oliver found balance, in his personal life after it. But as I often say, it wasn't just a couple of not guilty verdicts. It was 10 felonies and 4 misdemeanors. And it was a clean sweep by a very conservative jury in a very conservative courthouse. And I think as far as I'm concerned, he was fully vindicated. He was not a pedophile. He was not a child molester. I can't think of a worse way to torture Michael Jackson than to call him a child molester, because he had a great...
somebody who loves children so much, that's like the worst thing you could ever accuse him of. It's awful.
And he was haunted by the fact that he worked so hard as a child, rehearsing till 3 a.m, appearing in clubs on weekends. And so much pressure was placed on him when people realized what a genius he was. And, he did gravitate towards children because he felt he never had a chance to be one himself. And he felt that he was uniquely positioned because of his fame and wealth to help children around the world. And to call him this was the most cruel thing you could have done to him. And it's hard to believe it's still going on with this Robson Safechuck civil litigation, which, again, I'm just giving my opinion. I think they're probably settled.
I feel the same way, especially with Wade. I mean, you do interview after interview after interview. You're barbecuing at Michael's house, and nobody forced you to do these interviews. And there's actually a video that was uploaded in December 2012 after his supposed breakdown where he was still talking about Michael. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I just wish the estate had the guts to fight this, to the end. But they talk big and say they'll never settle it. I don't believe it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's already settled. That's why the judge isn't issuing a ruling.
Oh well, it's just so unfortunate, all because of the greed of one father starting this narrative, and it's deplorable, really.
Yeah, and I've always
absolutely.
Some of the fans didn't agree with me when I praised Randall Sullivan's book, Untouchable, but I've tried to emphasize for years now that this was a hard-hitting editor of Rolling Stone magazine who approached the subject with no particular, side. And he's someone who looks at things very skeptically. Because I've had a number of interviews with him, and he's pretty smart and pretty hard-hitting, and he was going to take his story where it went. After this exhaustive amount of research and writing on the life of Michael Jackson, he came to the conclusion that I don't think he was a pedophile at all, and I don't believe he molested Jordy Chandler or anyone else. And to me, to have that kind of an author reach those conclusions, to me that was very significant because, people who looked at Michael Jackson with an accusatory, approach, couldn't look at Randall Sullivan and say, oh, he's just a fan. He's biased, he's prejudiced. They had to look at Randall Sullivan and say, this is a pretty hard-hitting journalist who's not afraid to offend anybody. And he's concluded after carefully looking at the evidence that, Michael Jackson was not a pedophile. And, I think his book had the ability to change a lot of people's minds who were very skeptical of Michael Jackson. And unfortunately, this fraudulent campaign was started to try and kill the book. I have a pretty good idea who I think is behind it. I'm not going to say because I don't have any proof. But unfortunately, this fake campaign was generated off the Internet where fake reviews were flooding, the Internet, reviews by people who clearly hadn't even read the book because they made statements that showed they hadn't. And it was very unfortunate that a piece of objective writing, hard-hitting writing that offended a lot of people because he claimed a lot of people tried to take advantage of Michael. Unfortunately, the effort to kill this book, while it wasn't completely successful, I think it probably in the end hurt Michael Jackson's reputation because the book really can change people's minds about this whole delicate area. So that's why I supported Randall Sullivan, and that's why I was so offended by this fraudulent campaign to flood, Amazon and everyone else with fake reviews, because I felt whoever started that campaign, whoever participated in it, clearly didn't care much about Michael Jackson. That's obvious.
No question. Let's go out to area code 612. Please state your name and where you're calling from. 612, it's your turn, and you're on the line with Tom Mesereau on a Friday night. Please state your name and where you're calling from.
I'm Susie, and this is from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Oh, hi, Susie. Good evening.
Well, I first wanted to make a comment.
And if you could please mute your computer so we don't have echoes, that'd be great.
Oh, let me mute that. I'm sorry. The comment I'm making is it's too bad that Jordy Chandler himself doesn't come out right now and says that his dad made him lie. That would throw a wrench into a lot of these cases, and it would shock the world, too. And then I had a question for Tom Mesereau, which I appreciate everything he does. What does he think of Stacey Brown and some of the crap he says? Because someone had showed me some horrible comments where he was even accusing you, Tom, of, bribing the juror and even Catherine of that. I'd love to hear your comments, because I know you didn't, but
I have no respect for Stacey Brown. I think he's a half-baked journalist. He can't even write it. His book published about Michael Jackson was one of the most poorly written books I've ever seen. And, again, this is another book that was timed to try and hurt Michael, in my opinion, when he was fighting for his life in Santa Maria. And I never understood how Stacey Brown could be introduced on these TV shows as a friend of the Jackson family because, maybe he was friendly with some of the Jacksons at one point, but it was so obvious that he wanted to see Michael convicted, at least to me, that I didn't understand how any Jackson could want to be friends with this guy. But, I remember seeing him after the acquittals. I went back to my condo in Santa Maria where I'd lived for 6 months. And, of course, he was just stunned and shocked and clearly disappointed. It's obvious that he and Diane Dimond and others like them appear to have just tried to build their careers on seeing Michael Jackson convicted and sent to prison. And I don't know if they'll ever get over the fact that he was acquitted. So, I don't think much of Stacey Brown. I see he has a right to his opinions in life like every other human being, but, I don't think much of him as a journalist. I don't think much of him as an analyst. I think he's a loser, quite frankly.
Okay, let's go out to Eric. I'm sorry.
No, I said, as I've said before, if he doesn't like me, I must be doing something right.
I don't think anybody really pays attention to Stacey Brown, to tell you the truth. 760, please state your name and where you're calling from. You're on King Jordan Radio with Tom Mesereau on a Friday night. 760. It's your turn.
My name is Fred. I'm calling from.
Hello?
Okay, I guess that was a a fake caller. I did want to get your take on some of the stuff that was being said during the Michael Jackson trial. I had it loaded, so I'm just going to look for that. It's the Michael Jackson trial. I believe it's coverage of Jennifer London, trial coverage with Lisa Daniels and Jane Velez, June 3rd, 2005, and they talk about, I think here, Michael Jackson going to the hospital. So I want to get your take, and then I'll get your thoughts on the other side.
The prosecution says Michael Jackson is a pedophile and the defense says he's a victim, but both sides will have one last shot today to convince the jury as they finish up their closing arguments.
But the end of the trial seems to be taking its toll on Michael Jackson. He made another trip to the hospital overnight. MSNBC's Lisa Daniels is outside the courthouse in Santa Maria, California this morning with the very latest. Hi, Lisa.
Hi there. Good morning to both of you. That's right. Michael Jackson did go to the hospital, apparently for exhaustion. He was released late last night, but I have to tell you, Chris and Amy, it does not surprise me. Just looking at him, he did not look well. He looked weak. He looked shaky. And normally throughout the day, he leans over and talks to his defense attorney, Tom Mesereau. Yesterday, he just looked zoned out. He didn't talk to Mesereau. He really didn't talk to anybody. He was just staring right into space, not giving any emotion. Here to talk more about it is Jane Velez Mitchell, correspondent for Celebrity Justice. Jane, do you agree with me that Michael Jackson did not look well?
No, he didn't, and he has gotten thinner and thinner over the course of this trial. If you even look back at some of the videotapes that were played during this trial from a couple of years ago, he's got to be 20, maybe even more pounds heavier. He is gaunt, he is ashen, and he looks like a ghost.
And I got to tell you, when you look at it from a TV perspective, when you're a viewer at home, it's hard to tell because he's a bizarre guy. But being right there, up close, he looks so thin, so pale. Jane, as you said, you've been covering the trial. Tell me how his condition has worsened.
Well, this is a person who obviously has gone to the hospital several times now, and I've followed him various times. He creates a lot of chaos wherever he goes. When he went to the hospital nearby here at one point, he created such a scene. A patient had to be moved. That patient later died. There could be legal action stemming from that. This is more drama, and he generally chooses very significant days in the trial to become ill. I'm not questioning the fact that he's ill. He may be ill because of the stress of those significant days, but one of the last days he became ill was when the accuser took the stand, and that's the day he infamously showed up in his pajamas. So there he is in his pajamas, having just been released from the hospital, and the boy has to take the stand and testify against him. Added pressure for that young accuser. And now we are here at the very end of the trial. The jury is about to get this case, and he is once again ill, so the timing is questionable.
Well, it's a good point about the timing, but being up close, he did look very ill and just seemed out of it. That's the word I can only think of, out of it. Let's talk about closing arguments, because this is really it. The defense will finish up its closing arguments, then the prosecution will finish up theirs. What must Tom Mesereau get across today?
Well, he's been hammering home this theme, and it's almost like shades of Johnny Cochran's, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. If there is reasonable doubt about this family, you must acquit. That has been his theme. I think he will continue to hammer that home over and over again, calling this family, accusing Michael Jackson, not just the mother, but all the kids, grifters, actors, liars, con artists, hammering home that this mother, he believes and he claims, taught the children how to lie. And if you believe that, you have to acquit Michael Jackson.
It's interesting, Jane, because the two attorneys have very different styles. Ron Zonin, who was doing the prosecution's closing argument for Tom Sneddon, he is more of a professor. He's got his glasses in one hand, and he's really going through very methodically, very thoroughly, the timeline, trying to correlate acts with the timing. Mesereau, on the other hand, he's a huge guy. He's 6'5". He's got a little bit more charisma than Zonin. What do you think Zonin has to do in this final stretch to convince jurors, hey, we've got the burden and we met it?
He's got to erase the doubts about this family and bring it back to Michael Jackson's behavior. If he's acting like a pedophile, he has a history of people charging him with being a pedophile, then he is a pedophile, and it is your responsibility as jurors to put him away and make sure he can't do this to another boy.
Jane Velez-Mitchell, correspondent for Celebrity Justice. Jane, thanks for all the perspective. We appreciate it. So, Chris and Amy, the crowds are gathered very early this morning at 6:15 Pacific time. The crowds are the biggest I have seen so far. And today is the day that by the end of today, the jury will have the case in its hands.
Wow, 10 years ago, Tom, Jane Velez being a little harsh there, kind of saying, implicating that that Michael Jackson might have been faking his ailments. On the day of the hospital, she cited the accuser when he testified. Your comments about their comments and Jane Velez's comments.
Well, I mean, I think he was treated very harshly by these journalists. I mean, you know, on the one hand, they very correctly perceived that Michael was thin, looked sick, didn't look well, took this whole experience in a very, very hard way. And then they, on the other hand, they try to say, you know, he's faking it at strategic times. I mean, it just, you know, Michael had a terribly difficult time going through this experience. You know, he was a sensitive, delicate artist, you know, a creative, humanitarian person who was the last one who belonged in a criminal courtroom fighting for his life for 5 months. And remember, that was the trial. He was also, you know, for a good year before that, you know, preparing his defense, trying to find the right attorney and the right team. And he went through a horrible, horrible ordeal that I've said many times I don't think he really recovered from. But to call it strategic, you know, that's just unduly harsh. I think they were just looking for stories. As far as the comments about me, first of all, I'm 6'2", not 6'5". And I think Jane was getting in a subtle dig there by comparing me to Johnny Cochran when he said, if it doesn't fit, you must have quit. First of all, Johnny Cochran was the greatest trial lawyer I ever saw. I've said that many times. And I owe him a real debt of gratitude because he is the one who recommended me to Michael and Randy Jackson when they wanted to replace their lawyers. And Randy and Michael both told me that they called Johnny, and Johnny actually was at the hospital at one point, and asked him about me, and he gave me a glowing recommendation. So I'll never forget the fact that he did do that. And, you know, I've also told people that while I knew him, we got awards together at one point. The Century City Bar Association in Los Angeles gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award on the same night that I got Criminal Defense Lawyer of the Year.
Wow.
I got the award because of my defense of Robert Blake when I got him bail in a murder with special circumstances case, which had never happened in California before and has never happened since. But so I knew Johnny, and he always said nice things about me to everybody, but I wasn't one of his close friends. You know, I'd never been to his home, and you know, I wish I had been. You went
to his funeral, right?
I went to his funeral with Michael Jackson
during the trial because it was an off day, right?
Yes, and actually, I had gone to Judge Melville and asked him, could we go to that funeral? And he said, no, I can't give you a day off. And then
what's your opinion of that? Is the judge inclined?
Well, he had a point. He said that if I let every juror, you know, off, you know, when they have a funeral of a friend, I said this thing could get out of control. I understood his point. He was.
But you would agree this is different circumstances. This is Johnny Cochran. He's in the same ball game as you guys. Definitely different circumstances.
The judge didn't want to, you know, give us a special day off for fear that, you know, you'd be seeing jurors doing it all the time. I understood his concern because he, you know, the spotlight was on him from everywhere in the world. He wanted to run a tight ship and keep control over a situation that always looked like it could go out of control. He saw what happened to Judge Lancito in the O.J. Simpson case. I don't know if his reputation ever really recovered from. With this perception that he that he had let the case get out of control. The sad thing there was Judge Ito was one of the best and fairest judges in Los Angeles, but his reputation got hammered after that. But at any rate, coincidentally, it turned out to be a day in which we were not in court. I believe it was a holiday of some kind. I can't remember what it was, but Michael and I went to the funeral. It was an amazing funeral in Los Angeles. It was a celebration of a life well lived. And even though I think Johnny was the best trial lawyer I ever saw, I think Jane Velez Mitchell was trying to undercut me when she said that what I was saying was similar to, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit, because she said that knowing a lot of people were skeptical of Johnny when he did that. Turns out Johnny knew exactly what he's doing, and he won the biggest case of his career. But I don't think she said that to compliment me. I really don't. Particularly, she knew that a lot of white jurors who were upset over the O.J. Simpson verdict, didn't like that phrase. And it reminds me that when Snedden put Attorney Larry Feldman on the stand in the trial as one of the prosecution witnesses. And remember, Larry Feldman represented the Chandlers and then gave advice to the Arvizo. And I made a lot of argument about that throughout the trial. But he did bring out from Larry Feldman the fact that he had represented Johnny Cochran. And I felt that Snedden did that hoping that this jury that didn't have one African American on it would think that I was sort of similar to Johnny Cochran. That was the way I reacted to him doing that. And also there was another witness, what's his name, the owner of the Laugh Factory. I just can't remember.
Jamie Masato?
Jamie Masato, who I cross-examined. And at one point, one of his answers, which I thought was rehearsed and contrived, he mentioned, the acquittals of Robert Blake and O.J. Simpson, suggesting in his own way to the jury that, you don't want to join the jurors who acquitted those people. So a lot of these, games were being played, psychological games, throughout the trial. Many efforts were made to discredit me and the defense with analogies and with comments that I think they thought this conservative jury up there would take and not look too favorably on me. But, the jury did its job. They deliberated for, I believe it was 8 days. They went through
everything. Wasn't it a whole week?
It was a whole week. I believe I think it was 8 days.
One Friday to another Friday, right?
No, I think it was Friday to the next Friday, and then the verdict was the following Monday, I believe. So they really spent time.
Well, it was June 13, 2005. Yes, it was a Monday. Yes, it was.
Fortunately, they did the right thing. But comments like that from Jane Velez Mitchell, and I like Jane Velez Mitchell, by the way.
And you've been on our show. She did get fired from HLN.
Yeah, she's always been very nice to me and always was very professional with me, but I think that comment suggests that maybe she wanted a conviction in the case. I don't know.
She definitely seemed like she did want one. Okay, just want a couple more clips and then we'll let you go. I believe this is Dan Abrams from 10 years ago.
Joining us now is NBC News chief legal correspondent Dan Abrams. Dan, how apparent were the weaknesses in this case? You were here start to finish.
They were apparent from the beginning. The question, I think, was, were the jurors going to be so offended by the other allegations? Were the jurors going to be convinced Michael Jackson had molested a child, maybe not this child, but a child, so that they would say, we can't let him walk? In the end, that didn't happen.
Was this a case of missteps by the prosecution or an inherently weak case, or did the defense carry the day with its very effective cross-examinations?
Well, it seems pretty clear that the prosecution fizzled from the outset. I mean, these jurors talked again and again about how much they disliked the mother of the accuser. They didn't like the way she looked. They didn't like the way she talked. They didn't like the way she snapped at times while she was testifying. All in all, they hated her. And that's exactly what the defense had hoped would happen here, is that this jury would believe the entire case is tainted because the mother can't be believed, and that is exactly what these jurors said.
Dan, do you think Michael Jackson's celebrity worked in his favor?
I don't think that this was all about celebrity. Some people are saying that he was acquitted because of who he is. I don't buy it. I think he was acquitted because of who the accuser and his family is. I think that this is a family that has tried to get money in the past. I think in the end these jurors simply didn't trust the mother, and as a result, they said, we can't believe beyond a reasonable doubt that this happened exactly as this boy claims it did.
So ultimately it came down to credibility. Dan Abrams, thanks for joining us.
All right, Tony.
Okay, Tom, your take of Mr. Dan Abrams on his take of the winning of all 14 counts.
Well, there was a lot more to the prosecution's case than just the mother. The mother was a disaster, but, you also had to disbelieve 3 of her children, and you had to disbelieve a lot of witnesses who said that Michael had given alcohol to, underage people, underage kids.
Right.
Remember that the 4 acquittals, the 4 lesser-included offense acquittals on misdemeanors involved giving alcohol. In other words, the last 4 felonies in that 10-felony indictment were horrible allegations that Michael had given alcohol to children to prepare them to be molested. And if you acquitted Michael on any of those 4 felonies, you also had the option of convicting him of simply giving alcohol to someone underage. And they acquitted him of that too. So the jury had to disbelieve an awful lot of witnesses. You had people who worked at Neverland saying they saw acts of molestation, and they were pretty horrible accusations. About allegedly seeing Michael giving oral sex in the shower and things of that sort, sex in the bedroom, sex outside. You had some people claiming they saw Macaulay Culkin being molested.
There was no actual sex ever accused, though, right? There was no penetration. There was just molestation accused, right?
No. Well, molestation can be a variety of things. But the testimony, if believed, was very disturbing. The problem was that these people would, suddenly be cross-examined and they'd change their stories. They had asked for money. They went to the media. They wanted to do this. They wanted to do that. I think we the defense, effectively painted a picture, which is a true one, of just, poor Michael Jackson being surrounded by greedy people who wanted to capitalize in one form or another, being surrounded by jealous people. I remember there was one prosecution witness who went across, made a comment to the effect that, I was only doing what everybody else does around Michael Jackson, meaning I was just trying to profit in my own way. And, it was a very sad picture of this wonderful artist, very sensitive, creative spirit, who was just had people constantly nipping at his heels in one form or another, trying to get something into their pocket, whether it was money, whether it was a project, whether it was any number of things, a book, an interview. And I think we effectively showed what the world of Michael Jackson was like and what a price he paid for his fame and his fortune. So I think it was a lot more complicated what went on in the courtroom during those 5 months than what Dan said. Certainly the mother was a disaster. I just let the mother talk, and she was a nightmare. But I think the whole world of the Arvizos that we presented was just fraught with problems. And, to have the prosecution claim that Wade Robson, Brett Barnes, and Macaulay Culkin were molested, and then to have us start our case with the 3 of them saying we were never touched, that didn't exactly help them either. I remember when the prosecution was winding down its case, one day I was in the courtroom, Tom Snedden was there, and he said to me, "Who are your first witnesses going to be?" And I told him, Wade Robson, Macaulay Culkin, Brett Barnes, and he looked like he was stunned. I got the impression that he thought, they just weren't going to come, and he just seemed utterly stunned. Because you remember, they were putting witnesses on one after another to claim these young men were molested. So,
well, they were third-party witnesses, right?
Yeah, I think we just systematically undermined their case with effective cross-examination, and then sealed the acquittal with the witnesses we called in our case. Even though, as I said before, there were risks associated with putting on a case, I felt we had to go all out. We had to get it. He had to win this one, because if it hung, they would have retried him. It would have been a different situation. I don't know if Michael, he probably would have withstood it, but it would have been devastating for him. And I just didn't think it was worth the risk. I said we have to go all out and try and win every single count.
Yes, and you don't know if the second time around, if the judge might have been harder. That's also a possibility.
My sense was he definitely would have withdrew some of the rulings that he made for us. That absolutely helped us a lot. I think the prosecution would have had it would have been a less fair trial. Let's put it that way. Like I'd seen happen in some other cases, like the one I just mentioned, when the same judge decided, I'm not going to let you argue this, I'm not going to let you argue that. You're not going to call this expert. You're not going to call this witness, and almost ensured that the prosecutors got the conviction they wanted. I had a funny feeling that could happen in a retrial in this case.
Wow, it was definitely stressful on Michael, but I could just imagine the stress that you as an individual had to go through. The media is watching you every single day. They're probably trying to get you in awkward positions to take pictures of you. And you must have been in, some anxiety, at least I would think. You're only human. So how did you deal with that?
I lived like a hermit. A lot of people a lot of lawyers in my position probably would have enjoyed being celebrities, hanging out at the hotels and the restaurants and the bars. And all I did was go to bed at 7:30, latest 8 o'clock every night, and got up at 3 o'clock every morning. And all through the night, my staff was opening my door, delivering updated witness books on my stairwell. And I would get up at 3 in the morning and, make my coffee pot and start, devouring, witness books until I got to the courthouse. And that's how I live. I didn't want to be in a position where anybody could take a picture of me and try and make me look bad. I didn't want the local people in the community to think I was some Hollywood hotshot that just showed up to be a celebrity. I didn't want anyone to come to any conclusions like that. And so I lived like a hermit. That's what I thought it took to win.
And we do have a comment. Somebody said that they saw a picture of Howard Weitzman, and I saw it too. He's allegedly being friendly with the other counsel that's representing Wade Robson. He seems to be, it's on the internet, it seems to be playfully laughing with him outside the court. And they wanted to get your opinion on a very serious matter of, is this in the norm of a lawyer?
Well, lawyers, try to be professional with each other. Even in hard-fought legal battles, it's not unusual for a lawyer to, try and be professional. And frankly, our profession encourages lawyers to be civil to one another, no matter how high the stakes, no matter how antagonistic they are, in the courtroom. So I haven't seen the picture, and I can't judge what went on, except that just because someone's smiling or being civilized to someone else doesn't necessarily mean they're doing anything wrong or compromising their client. But I haven't seen the picture. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people felt like he was very close with the attorney for Mr. Robson and Mr. Safechuck. It just didn't look good from, you know what they say, perception is reality, and to let himself be taken a picture so easily and open and didn't even mind it at times, it just didn't send a good message, a lot of the fans felt.
Well, I would not want to have been. Listen, I tried to be professional and civilized with Sneddon during the trial. I think he was professional with me. You were never
ball game. That's a different ball game.
Well, you were never going to see us shake hands. You know, we didn't do that. And I think lawyers who act professionally, you know, very often will get more out of judges because judges like to see professional behavior. But again, I can't give an opinion. I haven't seen the picture, and I don't know what was going on. I just don't.
Absolutely. Okay, there's this one last story I want you to talk about, and then we'll say goodnight. Here's the clip of Mr. Freddie Gray.
The young state prosecutor sounded supremely confident as she dropped the bombshell. Freddie Gray's death, Marilyn Mosby declared, was a homicide.
We have probable cause to file criminal charges.
But now the work of trying to get convictions begins, and Mosby's cases against the 6 officers are by no means slam dunks.
These charges are very tricky to get convictions of, especially in this set of facts.
Andrew Alperstein's one of 2 former Baltimore prosecutors we spoke to. He says the second-degree depraved heart murder charge against Officer Caesar Goodson, who drove the van Gray suffered his spinal cord injuries in, will be especially difficult to prove.
Typically, it's described in law schools across the country as somebody who would throw a flower pot out a 20th-story window on a crowded downtown street. You know, a reasonable person should know that that's going to cause a potential risk to injure somebody or kill them.
But he says proving Goodson knew beforehand that he was creating a specific risk of death for Freddie Gray will be tough. Analysts say many brutality cases against police are difficult to win. In 1992, 4 L.A. police officers were acquitted of assault in the Rodney King case, even though they'd been videotaped beating him. 4 New York City officers were acquitted of second-degree murder in the 1999 death of Amadou Diallo. They'd shot him more than 40 times, mistakenly thinking he had a gun. Legal experts say jurors are often sympathetic to police officers because of the dangerous nature of their work. But the Baltimore officers' lawyers know their city is different.
I'm sure that's coming, that they'll try to get a change of venue in the case because the juries tend to be, you know, anti-police to some extent in Baltimore.
Analysts say inconsistencies in witness statements, lack of video in the police van are big hurdles for prosecutors in the Gray case. What's their strong suit against the officers?
The Office of the State's Attorney is likely going to emphasize the innumerable requests that Mr. Gray made seeking medical treatment. It seems as though that they are really banking on the idea that Mr. Gray petitioned for help and was denied.
Much will depend on the woman bringing this case. Marilyn Mosby's been the chief prosecutor in Baltimore for only 4 months. Jeremy Eldridge, who worked with her, says she only had a few years' experience as a trial prosecutor.
She did have some felony experience, but she didn't handle any homicides, any wiretapping cases, or any attempted murders. So the question then becomes, can a state's attorney who did not have that experience handle a case of this magnitude?
Okay, Tom, first your thoughts on the very young Marilyn Mosby taking on this type of case, only at 35 and working on it for 4 months, as you heard in the clip, and your assessment of the 6 officers charged in the Freddie Gray situation.
Well, I'm very appalled by what happened to Freddie Gray. I think he was just discarded like a hunk of meat. And I think he was dehumanized by these officers. I think they felt he was someone with little value. And somebody should be held accountable because what happened to him is a total disgrace. However, as a lawyer who knows something about the criminal justice system, I think it's going to be difficult to convict all of these police officers. Because remember, you know, you heard the prosecutor say there's probable cause to charge them. Well, probable cause is a very light standard. You know, probable cause is also described often as a reasonable suspicion. But in a court of law, you've got to prove someone guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. And when I say beyond any reasonable doubt, I mean each element of the crime must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, including their intention. You know, criminal intent is usually an element of each charged crime. There are different types of intent that apply to different types of charged crimes. But as I like to argue, you know, in my closing arguments, that, you know, they've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person thought like a criminal. And I think to try and figure out what happened in the van, because remember, each individual officer is going to require specific proof that they did certain things that amounted to a crime. And that may not be...
Do you think one's going to flip on the other? And is that maybe the hope?
The jury, you know, I don't think it's going to be... I don't think everyone will be convicted. I think there'll be some convictions, and there should be. But you also may have a situation where jurors say, you know, I believe somebody did something wrong, but I can't tell who. I'm sure these officers will have explanations for why they did what they did. I don't know the evidence. I haven't seen any witness statements, but I would suspect that the driver will probably say, I got a call, there was another emergency, I thought another officer's life might be in danger, and that's why I didn't go right to the hospital with him. You know, and, you know, as the person who was being interviewed said, jurors tend to want to have faith in the police. And there's no one that I admire more than a courageous, honorable police officer. Because without courageous, honorable police officers, where would, you know, a lot of us be? Where would our kids be? You know, on the other hand, there's no one I have more contempt for than a corrupt police officer who abuses their power and devalues human beings. I mean, look at that case in South Carolina. White police. I mean, that was a cold-blooded, premeditated murder as far as I'm concerned. But in the Freddie Gray case, clearly somebody is guilty of something. The question is, in the end, will the jurors know who that person is and what exactly they're guilty of, or are things going to be so confusing and so unclear that they'll say we have a strong suspicion that this was mishandled, but we don't know exactly who did what. I'll say this, I think a civil suit against the police department is probably a slam dunk in that case. But convicting officers... You could also say now look at them, they have to spend all their money on defense attorneys. They're essentially, you know, no matter what happens, they'll probably not be have a regular job. I mean, who wants to hire them, first of all? Their careers are finished. I mean, even if they get out of this, which, you know, like you said, some of them could, a lot of damage has been done just by these charges. Agree or disagree? No, that's absolutely true. But, you know, the police union very often hires defense lawyers, and they usually hire very experienced ones. So I think they'll have, in a case like this, very experienced, very skilled defense attorneys who know their business. And getting back to part of your last question, you know, as far as the prosecutor goes, I'm told she's not very experienced, but I'm also told she's very bright. And she probably will surround herself with good lawyers who are experienced. You know, she's not stupid. She, you know, if she hasn't tried that many cases, she'll try and make up for it by surrounding herself with people who have and using them in the trial as well. And
do you think she went ahead with this case because of the outroar? Was that part of it? I mean, look at the one in New York where Eric Gardner is clearly on camera being choked out, it seems like. There was some video evidence in Ferguson. I mean, out of all of them, this actually looks like there's more testimony that's not with your eyes. There's more testimony that's just like, what do you say? It's like circumstantial. And the others. I mean, Freddie Gray hadn't done anything wrong, from what I gather, and wasn't a threat to anybody. So how does he get his spine broken, you know, in the middle of this arrest?
something's really wrong. Something's radically wrong with what happened there. Now, I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know what defenses or excuses, these police officers are going to use. I suspect they're going to say they were diverted to some other crisis or thought some other officer was in trouble and they had to make a judgment call. And I think they'll emphasize the difficulties of, and the threats and the risks of being a police officer. That you can't always think everything through, in a quick second. That you've got to react to different types of situations, different types of threats, different types of confrontations. And I think the defense lawyers will, in the end, try and say you can't prove that their client did anything wrong or anything criminal. And they'll probably argue this should belong, bring it to the civil court if you think these officers weren't properly trained, if you think they weren't properly managed, if you think they, acted negligently, bring it in a civil courtroom, but don't let these officers be convicted criminals the rest of their life. That's what's going to be argued.
Well, there's no question it did calm down these crazy riots that happened. And, the Tamir Rice situation, I don't know if you've been following that, that still has not came to, that's been going on since November. And, it's just really, really strange that this took only 2 weeks and Tamir Rice, there was still no, justice for him.
Well, you mentioned Eric Garner also. What a horrible situation. I mean, it looks like, to me, he was murdered. The man was not. Yes. He was not threatening anyone. He wasn't fleeing. He asked to please let him breathe. I think that should at least have been a manslaughter charge. I really do. I'm shocked there's no criminal case there. I mean, that's on tape. It's obvious what was done to him.
Do you think, back to the Freddie Gray case, that the prosecutor hopes that one flips a dime on the other officer and says, look, I'll take a plea and I'll tell you exactly what did happen? Do you think prosecutors hope that?
Prosecutors always hope somebody will roll over on the others, will flip, as it's described in the literature. They're always hoping that, one defendant or even more than one defendant will make a deal and testify against the rest. It makes their case a lot stronger and makes their job a lot easier. But we don't know what statements were given in this case. We don't know what statements were given in the investigation. I don't know if these officers clammed up at the advice of their attorneys and didn't say anything, or if they gave statements that could end up hurting or helping them. I have no idea.
And finally, you were honored in a very big way with only a handful of presidents that were honored. I believe it was last week. Would you please share with my audience what went down in Cleveland with you?
Well, it was a great honor for me. I was asked to be the keynote speaker for the Cleveland City Club on what they call Law Day. And I got this invitation a number of months ago, and they gave a partial list of prior speakers that included President Obama, both President Bush, President Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Henry Kissinger, Condoleezza Rice, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and I saw this list, and I almost fell off my chair that they were inviting me to be the speaker. And I talked about pro bono work and the legal profession. And I talked about just the value of lawyers going out and helping the community. And a part of the audience were high school kids from Cleveland who asked to want to be lawyers and asked me a lot of questions about the profession and what I did. And, it's on YouTube. If you Google Cleveland City Club Tom Mesereau, you'll see the talk I gave, and it was a great honor for me.
What should they Google? What could they Google to see it?
If you Google Cleveland City Club Tom Mesereau, you will see it, a telecast of the talk I gave and the questions I answered after it. But it was a wonderful day.
And you told me one person asked you about Michael Jackson, right?
Yes, I was asked a question or two about Michael Jackson, which I expected, and because everybody's always fascinated about Michael Jackson. And I said what I always say, that he was one of the nicest, kindest people I ever met, and it was a real honor to represent him. But the focus of the talk was lawyers going into the community to help others. And I talked about how important that is from two perspectives. One, it helps the community, and two, it helps the lawyer's spirit and soul and character. And it was a wonderful day. It was really one of the highlights of my career, and I'm very blessed to have been invited to do that.
And you definitely have that. Well, maybe you'll post that on your website, mesereaulaw.com.
Yeah, Mesereau. My website is mesereaulaw.com. I started my new firm April 1st, Mesereau Law Group, and have a new website. And I just feel terrific and very blessed, and getting some wonderful clients calling, and onward in life. I feel very lucky.
And you generally enjoy what you're doing. You're not like one of these guys and say, "Yeah, I'm just going to sit in the sunset and call it a night." I mean, it sounds like you have no timetable of when you're going to retire.
I don't intend to ever retire. I intend to die in the courtroom, arguing a case. But I see no reason to retire.
With an acquittal. Well, this Wednesday, exactly at 2:25 Pacific time, it'll be exactly 10 years that Michael Jackson was acquitted. Your thoughts?
Well, it's hard to believe it's 10 years ago. 10 years ago, June 13th.
This Wednesday.
I'll never forget. You mean in June?
Yeah,
right?
a month from this Wednesday.
Yes,
I'm doing a special program on that. Yes. But,
I will never forget that day as long as I live. I just remember waking up that morning, and I knew something special was going to happen that day. And I've been on edge for a long time trying that case, and then waiting while the jury deliberated. But I always had faith that the jury was going to do the right thing. It was a very unique experience for me, and a great honor to defend Michael Jackson, a great honor to be his lead counsel in this acquittal. And justice was done. This man was never a pedophile, was never a child molester, and he was one of the nicest, kindest people I ever met. And I'll say that for the rest of my life because it's true.
Well, Tom, we really appreciate you coming on, and I hope you could make it to the special the show that I'm doing next month, exactly on June 13th. We'll talk more about that as we get closer. But good luck on your upcoming projects, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight. A lot of good stuff was said. Looking back at some of the clips that were played, very interesting show tonight, so I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'll be honored to be on your show in the future. And as I said many times, you and Luna Joe always do this great work, the way you come up with historical gems that are very thought-provoking, and you run a wonderful show, and thanks for having me.
Well, yes, Luna Joe did provide me with those clips that are not easy to get. So, yes, you are right about that with Luna Joe. We do appreciate that. And good luck with everything. And is it true that you were on CNN the other day?
I was. It was on the Freddie Gray situation.
Okay. Do you remember whose show?
It was Mr. What's his name?
Wolf?
I'm drawing a blank. It was in the morning early. I've done so many of these shows. I've been running around all day. I've been up since 3 in the morning.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Mr. Berman's show.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Tom, thanks a million, and I will speak to you soon.
Thanks a lot, and my best to all the fans. Thank you.
We appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the great Tom Mesereau, and he gave us one heck of an interview, ladies and gentlemen. And we hope that he joins us on June 13th, where we're going to have a special show with the bodyguards, Geraldine Hughes, and hopefully Tom, but we'll see. To hear this on replay, just wait 5 minutes until this is over, and you could hear this again. Sorry, there was a couple of technical problems during the program, but we thank Tom for hanging tough. We had the technical issue last time Tom was on, but this time it went pretty good. It was also interesting to hear John Ziegler and Tom talk. Very good. So as soon as I get done saying goodbye, I'm going to listen to the replay. So I hope you guys do that. Go look up Tom Mesereau's new website. Go check out his Cleveland situation, Cleveland City Club. Google that. Go check it out. And everybody, I hope you have a great weekend. Ann Bremner and Shannon Hogan tomorrow to talk about 2 years of Jodi Arias being convicted on Murder 1. And on May 14th, we have Stacey Honowitz, Dr. Robbie Ludwig, and Robin Sack, 10 years since the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, which most people think Joran Vandersel was a part of. Follow us on Twitter at Mr. King Jordan Radio. We thank the great Tom Mesereau, and we will speak to you. Soon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for calling and listening to King Jordan Radio.